Aloha, namaskara. Wonderful to be with you again. And I really appreciate the divine timing of how this sutra rolled, this pada. So we're in time for the holy days and then the immersion training on Kauai in January. And then we're going to jump into the learning how to live within Earth's density and maintain a sense of lightness in the Vibhuti Pada. So I really hope that you decide to join and come along because your fire is such a vital part of this gathering. And it really just feeds and nourishes the spirit of this whole mystical gathering. Okay. Where we're going to jump to our share screen. And I'm just going to pull up the sheet that you got last week. Maybe I can minimize it here a little bit. Okay. So we'll chat last week's sutra again as we, give it the time that it deserves because there's a lot of layers here. There's a lot of, even in these mystical teachings, it gives us a sense of the greater arc of our human experience. As the sutra closed, where, Patanjali said, look, this isn't the last step. These are the steps as far as the human incarnation is concerned. And when we, come to new lokas or new realms of experience in the afterlife or in future incarnations, we can rest assured that there will be further instructions awaiting us. Okay, so let us sit here as the path, the Yoga Marga opens, this conduit between our original primordial ancestors to the current, present moment divine of modern life. And as my husband would say, I'm still not sure about it, but I like the way it feels. We are everyone who has ever been born. Sounds better when I say it out of my own mouth and hear him behind it. So let's begin with our invocation. Feel all these pathways light up within you. Purushartha shunyanam gunanam pratiprasava kaivalyam svarupa pratishtava chitti shaktiriti. Liberation occurs when natural causal laws become inactive and the spirit has nothing in itself, or when the pure power of pure awareness remains exactly as it is and is unchangeable forever, now as it always was. So, that some of us have been on this road together for a long time, and on this path. And so we've gone through the Samadhi Pada, those of us who've done it in the online mentorship in its entirety twice. That has been profound. And just the, my whole process has been about finding synergy in life. That's the fire that blazes within me, and being able to weave in all of these traditions, my own journey of transpersonal psychology, over 30 years of working with shamanic plant medicines, shamanic, structural integration, life's fire, not just studying this, but, offering it regularly as embodiment practices, weaving the sutra, being in the laboratory of working with, others who have this passion within them. They have this fire in their soul. And so thank you for melding me in this process and raising me up. And so as we've gone through the sadhana pada twice, the samadhi pada, and we finally, took the brave leap into the Kaivalya Pāda, what have we explored? How to make our mind fit, right? How to exercise our intelligence, how to navigate our mind, understand its layers of density, its layers of penetrability, its function, its limitations, so that it becomes a fit vehicle to release what is soul sucking, what is, neurotic, what is unuseful, to understand the possibilities of other worlds of supernatural awareness rather than living a mundane life. The cloud of noble things, the different ways to let go, the wings of yoga, the sources of friction, which without skill, they become irritants. With skill, they become the friction for the fire, the tapas of practice that helps us to transform the raw stuff of our life into passionate purpose and burn the gunk and the dross of what is clogging the gears. We've explored the path of release. We've explored the distinction between the qualities of self and our true essence. We've explored Kaivalya as returning to the central organ of an unburdened heart through pratiprasava, remediation, involution, which is where we become deeply involved. Tivra samveganam asanaha, we're deeply interested. There's nothing lukewarm. We don't just live on half-baked ideas or the glitz of weak teabag wisdom. It's like we're taking it into our heart, into our lives, into our soul, into our dreams, right? That our dreams can become realized. And so here in the final sutra, which Patanjali has just kind of tucked in there, sequestered. And this is the Sandhya Bhashya. So the Sandhya Bhashya is the twilight speech. Okay, this is where the arcane teachings are deciphered for those who otherwise wouldn't be able to unpuzzle them, right? So this is where the transmission for when the pashu, the cattle consciousness or the herd, they tend to come a little bit late and leave a little bit early. So this is the twilight speech for those who stay, are there to kindle the fire and to tend to the fire, in which there's this yantra, this transmission through fervent gesticulations and transference of the spark through our eyes to one another. And so here are sequestered the Purushartha. Purusha, what fills us with light, the one who rests in the busy city of the body and the world, the soul, the spirit, and Artha is the form and the function of our form. So here in this closing sutra, as we seal this chapter on what all about freedom, the aims of life are addressed. Okay. So we've had in Pada 1, the Dharma, the science of understanding chitta vritti, and the code of conduct. Okay. Yog anushasanam. The path is laid before us. This is a path of refining the mirror of our mind to reflect the light of love and of growing into life. In Pada 2, we had the yama and the niyama on how to cultivate healthy psychological hygiene, spiritual hygiene, as well as the discipline which means studentship of contentment. Okay. And then in Pada 3, there are like the byproducts, the extra gifts of supranormal awareness and powers. And then Pada 4, the actions that do not result in digging deeper trenches of karma. And finally, Kaivalya, or to use the Vedantic term, moksha, which comes from much, which means loosen up. You know, Patanjali has said this over and over again. See where you're prudish and see the hubris behind that. This is a process of unearthing and returning back to our wild and holy self, the rishi and the rishika, who has an extraordinary power of vision that is really rooted in original self, core self. So this sutra alludes to, and this will be in your notes, you'll get more notes for this, Varna, Ashrama, and Purushartha. So let's talk about Varna Dharma. These are our duties within the community. Avocations, I had to look that word up. And an avocation is your minor occupation, okay? Because, you know, living with heart and living with soul is a full-time occupation, right? You know, putting love out into the world. And then the way that we do that, that's our Varna. And it's the psychological characteristics. It's the raga, the way that we bring color into the world through our words, through our thoughts, through our deeds, through our expression, and the way we express our own personal experience. Varna literally means color. I wonder if the word varnish has similar roots. Okay. I should have painted my nails red. I don't usually paint my fingernails, but I did read that this is, you know, like in the East, they'll put mendi on their fingertips. And this is to indicate that your hands are an extension of your heart. Okay. That what you make, you're making with love. So that's the red fingernails. It also means a cover, which is similar to Vasana. Oh, this is all just streaming in right now. Vasana is like the colors, that the sheath, the underlying mood, the passion, the wish behind the wound that we carry that impels all of the vritti and karma, etc. It means kind and it means quality. And it is a header for the 4 stages of our evolution. So one of these is the Brahmana caste. You know, and Mr. Iyengar says, you know, the caste system isn't as rigid as we think in India. I'm not so sure about that. And that book was written some time ago. But the Brahmin caste is, by the way, notice the male emphasis, a priestly caste. Okay. So when we look back in the tradition of yoga, there were actually women rishikas. Okay. So again, this is an indication of the hijack of the masculine centric yoga kind of slant. But anyway, it's where people are living, you know, their life as spiritual conduits and as holders of sacred space and of rituals. They keep rituals. And they feed the holy in life. And then we have the Kshatriya, which is the warrior class. In the Gita, it's described as heroism, vigor, firmness, resourcefulness, generosity, fighting for what is right, upholding justice to maintain truth. And then you have the Vaishya, or the merchant class, which in the Gita is described, this will all be in your notes, one who cultivates, tends, and looks after the needs of society, conserves, is thrifty and frugal, but struggles to earn wisdom and virtue according to their mental capacity. And then we have the Shudra class, the working class. And the Gita describes it. Okay, I'm going to quote it, didn't come out of my mouth. So, but it's a direct quote. One who is servile, a sycophant, submissive, and labors hard. So Mr. Iyengar says that we actually go through these phases in our own process of developing a sadhana, a spiritual practice. In the beginning, we start with Shudra Dharma, great effort to sweat profusely in body and brain, Shvetana. To get a grasp, it's like embodiment. We have to make the effort. And I know in myself, when I'm learning something, I'm working way too hard. There's a lot of flailing. There's not economy because you got to kind of get the chops in before you can develop economy and efficacy. And he describes it as a period of yoga practices almost like manual labor. Boy, flashback to the old Yoga Hanalei room. Okay. I was like gesticulating and, and maybe speaking too loud at times. So there was a lot of effort there. In the second phase of practice, it's Vaishya Dharma, in which we consciously set out to accumulate experience in order to teach, so as to earn a living. In the third phase of practice, Kshatriya Dharma, which is the warrior, is when we build up courage and become firm and strive further to develop skill and mastery over the subject. Then we gain the authority to share our knowledge and experience and to maintain and uphold the subtle refinement of the art. Then one's sadhana is that it is Kshatriya Dharma. And then in the fourth stage of practice, this is Brahmana in the yogic sadhana, is when we further proceed in our practices in order to experience the invisible, exalted, and absolute stage of being, which is the soma of the universal spirit. And we surrender to this greater integrity, or we offer into the greater integrity in our word, thought, and deed. This spiritualization is known as yoga. Okay. So the ashrama are the stages of our life, which are approximately 25 years long. And, as I say this, I'm curious if this is according to the old calendar, which was 13 moons, 13 constellations. And apparently NASA has gone back to the original calendar, the 13th moon, where it was the lunar cycle, 28 times 13, resulted in, I can't do the math right now, but somebody else could. What is 28 times 3 times? I guess it's 354 days, something like that. Maybe it's not, it's something longer, but basically we don't have that leap year, which is when we were brought out of touch with Ritumbra, the cycles of time and the lunar phases. And interestingly enough, indigenous people in the shamanic tradition, they believe that disease is when people have come out of touch with nature. I actually saw an interesting program on a PBS where they speak about, oh my gosh, let's see if I can pull this up. It's speaking about quantum physics and how time is measured, and that there's clocks that establish kind of like the absolute time, and they're set by crystals, right? These crystals that are vibrating. However, this, I'm going to go deeper into this in the Vibhuti Pada as I understand it more. But if a clock is elevated from sea level, it actually changes time. Isn't that interesting? I don't understand it, but I believe them. I believe these authorities. So anyway, 25 years of time for each ashrama. It's a little bit abstract. Okay. Is it lunar calendar? How high up off the ground are we? We don't know. The first one is brahmacharya ashrama. And this is the phase of the student. Okay. So we're living in a community. We might be sent to a gurukula where there's some kind of a teacher who is basically socializing us and teaching us about basic hygiene, yama and niyama. You know, before asana was taught, there was yama and niyama, so that we could be functioning members of society and also have a sense of social responsibility. Then, you know, and in that phase, by the way, there was what's the word? Abstaining from sex, celibacy. Okay. So you're young. And this was because you were to develop a relationship with yourself and with your own vital energies, like brahmacharya, because your relationship to yourself as a temple and your relationship to the divine is a reflection of all your other relationships. Okay. So you learn how self-care, self-respect, respect for the greater integrity, you know, rather than kind of our Western tendency to first have sex and then maybe fall in love. Okay. Which I'm not snuffing. I did plenty of that and actually got married that way. So anyway, sometimes it works. But it was a time of, you know, it's like that protected time of youth. Then you would go into grihast ashrama, and this is the phase of the householder, okay, where you build a home, you know, maybe you raise children, or there's nieces or nephews. There's a sense of fostering the next generation. And you're also, because you're a householder, there's inherently financial responsibilities. So you're in some way contributing to the community, you know, in some form, in order to be able to fund your family, the house, and the experience. And then eventually you would go into the Vanaprastha, which is the forest or the jungle dweller. And when this would happen, this is typically around age 50, which I was pointed out to me later by my friend Newton Brownstein, who's she's North Indian, and she was saying when Yoga Hanalei, when it was time for me to pass it on, that I was right on time, actually, because at age 50 is usually when you close the shop doors, when you shut down shop, and you actually go into a more internal place. You become a jungle dweller or a forest dweller, and you focus your attention more on your own practice again, the metaphysical teachings, and preparation for the afterlife, you know, and leaving this life of making it bigger and of nourishing others. And so typically what would happen, or traditionally what would happen, is you would make sure that your family was totally set up. So all of your affairs are in order. It's like, you know, the living will. And then you would actually have a gathering or a ceremony for your own funeral, the death of your worldly self. And there would be a cremation of an effigy of yourself. You cut off all your hair because the hair carries all of like the stories and it carries all the energy of your householder life. You cut off your hair and you change your name and you actually die to your family. You go off and wander into the forest or into the jungle with others who are ready to devote themselves to the inner journey of unwinding a lifetime. So in this phase is where we really start to, deeply embody the vairagya, non-attachment. It's communal living. And then we go to the sannyas ashrama, which is where we might even leave the forest community and we might become a wandering mendicant who is detached from worldly thought and attaches themselves to spirit. They eat if food is offered or if foraged or found, but really they're there to nourish their own soul. So let's go into the Purushartha. And maybe some of you recall that I offered, for me, when I don't know something or I tune into something, I go, wow, there's a whole rabbit trail to explore, and I'll learn about it. And then one of the best ways to learn about it is to share it in a workshop or an immersion. So one year I did this on the Purusharthas. So the Purushartha are, again, Purusha is our spirit and our soul, and Artha is the form, the function, and the aim. And this is where we can align our actions in the world at the right time and what is appropriate. Here's a quote from Christ. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. If you do bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. Okay, so we all come in, as Rumi says, pregnant with this mystical child, right? And this is our creation that we're offering. And it's the pangs of birth that rendered Mary, and she gave birth, to this mystical child. So the Purushartha are really the blueprint for our human fulfillment, okay? These are encapsulating the inherent values of the universe. And they help us to keep into balance, right? We have our spirit, which finds comfort in being free of attachments. We have our soul, which finds comfort in forming intimate attachments and alignments. We have all these parts of ourself. How do we find coherency? So the Purushartha give us insights in how we can evaluate and make good decisions so we can lead a balanced life, which isn't hyper-focused in one area of ourselves and leaves us hollow and undeveloped in others. So they are considered to be psychomoral, and they coordinate our material desires with our spiritual life. They honor our humanity because we are instinctual beings. We have an instinct for intimacy, to procreate, for sex, for power, to be empowered, and even to have beautiful things, right? Like for me, that's a really important thing. Growing up with a mother who's an artist, like I need beautiful, like I just can't imagine living in a place where there isn't beauty and things that are made by hand and with love. And, I feel really lucky because when she was in art school and when she was teaching art, there was a lot of trading that happened amongst the artists. So these pieces were shared with each other. And so for me, that's a really important part, is having that art and that beauty and even good books, right? So we have a thirst for the artistic and the cultural life. And then we also have a deep burning hunger. There's a fire in our bellies, that Agni, for reunion with what is really primal, what is authentic, what is original soul. So the Purushartha help us to see our whole life, to see it as a whole. Its hopes, its acquisitions, its aspirations, the enjoyment of acquisitions, its sublimation, its reprioritization, and spiritualization. If we were to look at these goals or aims of life, we can see that they inherently have tension, right? But again, as Albert Einstein said, and Patanjali had a sutra for it, Tatodvadvan abhigataha, we live in a field of polarities. And it's not about neutralizing these polarities, but feeling them as like vectors, infinite vectors in span and space, to keep us expanding our lives and expanding our capacity to enjoy. And it also reminds me how Patanjali said earlier, the more complex an organic creature or a psyche, the more discrete its functioning is, the systems, the more it experiences pain and the more it can experience joy. Okay. So as Khalil Gibran said, if we don't weep all of our tears, we won't laugh all of our laughter either. So it's like, the intensity, holding our intensity with tenderness. So we're being given this creative resolution to help us balance these tensions into an action-filled life and a renunciation-driven life, that the best of both worlds can be realized, that we can dedicate ourselves to action while letting go of the fruits of our actions, right? It's like you create something of beauty, whether it's something physical or whatever it is, and you put it out there in the world, and it's no longer yours, right? It's your offering. So action is without attachment or craving for results or even recognition. So let's go into these Purusharthas. We have Dharma. Dharma means to support. Okay. And this is where we have careful personal observation of our ethical, social, intellectual, and spiritual duties. This is what's taught at that level of brahmacharya, of studentship. And then it's to be, as life becomes more complex and we're dealing with associates or, tumultuous political change or environmental change, all the things that we don't have control over. Hopefully we're solid in these dharmic principles to help us move forward with integrity. It's something that we can follow throughout our life. Without having psycho-spiritual intimacy with ourselves, we really can't realize or embody Dharma. When we have this intimacy with ourselves, it's that sense of ritambara, that nirvichara vaisharadya yatma prasadanam, as we learn to hold our own humanity with tenderness. We recognize that nobody has it any better or any worse on the internal level, that everybody's struggling with the same kind of stuff. And so to move in a way in which would be harming to another, just to lift ourselves up, would go against the very grain of our being. It would keep us up at night. It would be torture within our souls. So it's that sense of like, you have to do something when it's the right thing to do, because otherwise it would completely cause you to fall apart. It's that sense of deep conscience within us. So it's not for our personal material rewards, but it's because we're in touch with Ritam, the pulse of the heart of creation, and it's the right thing to do. Okay, so this is spoken in Sutra 148. Ritambara tatra prajna. Which is where like the highest wisdom is tuning in. We're rhythmic beings. We're in tune, and we're by tuning into the movements, the pulse in the spaces that we inhabit. We're being moved by this impulse. And this is interesting. I mean, I've done research on it, and it's, I guess, part of the Sanya Bhashya, because even the scholars say that it's nowhere to be found in a scribed form. And interestingly enough, Martine Prechtel says that, the oral tradition of indigenous peoples was only written down, not so that it wouldn't be forgotten, but so that people wouldn't have to do the work of living it into remembrance. Okay. So when things were written down, it was done even in a ritual way. But this hasn't, I mean, it's sort of been written down, but nobody can track to its origins. Ahimsa paramo dharma. Loving kindness to be a force of healing, of wholeness, of bringing together is our primary duty. So Dharma preserves and protects all that is created, in particular the innocents who cannot advocate for themselves. It signifies behaviors that are considered to be in accordance with Ritam, the cosmological intelligence and divine order of creation that is beyond our minds. It can't even be spoken. It's only something that can be felt within us. Ritam is what makes life possible. And in our own lives, it includes our duties, the right to exercise our rights, right? Like some people feel very strongly about voting. Some people don't, right? But, it's like exercising our rights, exercising good conduct, and living life in a good and useful way. This includes our duties, our spiritual duties, feeding the holy, remembering the greater integrity, and the behaviors that enable social order, right conduct, and to uphold virtue. So again, we're back at Yama. How we conduct ourselves in the world. So I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. We have Dharma, we have Kama, which is desire, we have Artha, which is our prosperity, and we have Moksha, or Kaivalya. These are the 4 Purusharthas. And it's saying that with Dharma, when we find like our vocation, right? When we're really in touch, like it said, we find our Dharma by what lights us up. And often what appeals to what is burning within us, that it's often through facing our challenges or reclaiming what we feel like's been taken away, or what's Sundara, what's been taken away or what's missing in life. that we discover our own unique sva dharma. Dharma recognizes that kama, feeding our desires, and artha, living a life of prosperity, are a means and not the ends. If we devote our precious energy to satisfaction of our basic urges, life actually becomes undesirable and even dangerous, right? It becomes an addiction, right? Something like sacred sex, right? Tantra. Tantra is not limited to sacred sex, but in the yogic tradition, sex is actually a viable spiritual path when it's done as a ritual of communion and of creation. If we become obsessed with it, right? It's like, we know the extreme numbers of porn addiction that happen, right? And then it becomes something that isn't even really satisfying. It's just like triggering the dopamine centers that would be similar for somebody who's addicted to narcotics. So we do have to have some self-regulation, and we need to learn how to accept and respect these aspects of the animal of ourselves, right? We are animals. We're something more than human in animal form. And learning how to respect these urges within ourselves in a way that can sustain harmony and order in the world. So Dharma helps us to find our true nature and our true calling. Thus, we play our part and our role in the cosmic concert. Dharma is foremost. If Dharma is ignored, artha and kama, profit and pleasure, respectively, lead to social chaos. So Dharma is our spiritual growth, our purpose, right living and morality. What creates order out of chaos? It is our kulyana, our duty, our right, our privilege, in which we are always like, when, as Satchitananda would say, when one hand does the work in the world, the other hand holds the hand of the child of remembrance. So the question for Dharma is, what is my purpose? How can I serve? This is where we are striving to be of sacred usefulness, to be helpful in society. When we are established in Dharma, our actions are spontaneous and appropriate. And we can respond in any situation in a way that is harmonious and upholds the natural law, which is love. Everything in around us supports our life, and we feel complete in ourself. And to be established in Dharma leads to a feeling of effortlessness. Okay. Well, this class is going to be a lot longer than I thought. Next, we have Artha. And here's a quote from the Upanishads. There is no joy in smallness. Joy is in infiniteness. So this addresses our economic consciousness in a parigrahastarye. Okay, so non-hoarding, but also realizing that resources come and go, that it is nature that is sharing her bounty with us. So Artha signifies the means of life, activities, and resources. And it enables us to be in the state we want to be in, okay? It incorporates our wealth, our career, financial security, and economic prosperity. And I know my husband's guru Anandamurti, he said that like if you're struggling economically, it can be very difficult to be able to devote time and energy to spiritual practice. Okay. So wealth is not something to be shunned, or abundance. And really, it depends on who you are. Okay. Even when I look in the phases of my life, when I moved to Kauai with like $1,000 in my pocket, I felt like the richest woman in the world. Of course, $1,000 30 years ago was worth a lot more money. So, what we need can change over time. A lot of people end up downsizing as they get older. They don't want to maintain these big households, right? So we start to reevaluate. Some people feel like they need more to feel comfortable, and there's really no judgment around that. So the proper pursuit of prosperity is considered an important aim of human life. Because if we have enough abundance, then we can progress to higher pursuits, right? Just think of all the philanthropists. Maybe they're looking for a tax break, but maybe actually they want to add to the future legacy. They become patrons of the arts and the sciences, etc. If we don't do our part to contribute, we become a parasite, a bottom feeder, a codependent. So Artha doesn't mean be greedy or hoard, simply to recognize what your needs are and to meet your own needs so that you can be free of anxiety or worries. It's usually in this stage that we find a partner to share household or life with. And this kind of bleeds over into Kama, which is where, we start to understand the dynamics of human love, of intimacy, companionship, and friendship. And through doing that, we, when do we pray to God? Is when the relationship is rough. We're like, God, help me. Or we remember the vow that we took. What did I say? In sickness and in health? Oh my God, right? So that's when we kind of lean into that spirituality and relationship. That is the path of awakening. Yoga is relationship. We help to raise others, and we help others. Married life is not considered to be a hindrance to happiness or spirituality, but it's not either requisite. So Artha helps us to question, like, what is truly valuable, and, for some people, they can't imagine not being in a relationship. For some people, they've gone through that. They don't want to do it. For others, they've never had that kind of an impulse. And it's really interesting. I did some research on the attachment styles, and it's most relationships, kind of, at least in their inception, were based on some kind of an unhealthy attachment style. Hopefully they evolve into a love in which there's real autonomy and independence, and there's an enrichment and a coming together. Okay. So having enough assets to support yourself and your family without hoarding or greed. And again, what you need depends on who you are. Wealth includes not only money or assets, but health, friendship, love, career skills, knowledge, resources. And these become the foundation for our dharma as well as our karma. Worldly success does not violate dharma and moksha. Wealth and poverty are states of consciousness. So the acquisitive instinct in humanity signifies our ability to enjoy prosperity and all that it connotes. This unfolds our spirituality when we are not economically starved. Here's a quote from the Upanishads. As is your desire, so is your will. As is your will, so is your deed. As is your deed, so is your destiny. So to enjoy the pleasures of life without compromise to our physical, mental, or spiritual health. What drives us as humans is pleasure. Without pleasure, life is hollow and empty. We have arts, we have music, sensuality, affection, friendship. If we're overly fixated on that, this would be our addiction, sloth, greed, and lust. The right kind of like looking to uncover and create beauty actually leads us to our dharma. And this is what brings fire to our mission. So this is really interesting. After all these sutras on Vairagya and Kleshas and everything, and it harkens to the 10th sutra in this pada, desire cannot be suppressed, only transformed, fulfilled, or moved beyond. So we might reflect from time to time if our pleasures are aligned with our soul's purpose, and to be careful for what we wish for. The yogic practice of kama is to be truly present. Just like pranayama, it's a totally sensory experience that includes the discovery of something, learning about it, developing an emotional affinity or connection to it, the process of enjoyment, and the resulting feeling of well-being before, during, and after. So whatever lies behind us and whatever lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. This is where yogic ritual, we see our body as a temple, and we brahmacharya, our energy is really precious. It was really precious. We need tremendous energy and drive on the yogic path. Mr. Iyengar says the body is the bow, and the asana, pranayama, and dhyana are the arrows that are aimed at the target, which is the seer or the soul. Our deepest kama is longing for oneness with the divine. Sukhanushayiragaha, finding that sweet spot in life. Love that honors our psychological values and our need for intimacy. Kama signifies our desire, our wish, our emotions, our aesthetics, the enjoyment of life, affection without violating our dharmic moral responsibility, artha, our material prosperity, or our journey towards moksha, life as a liberating experience. So it's necessary to satisfy the basic desires because their suppression will ultimately be a great source of hindrance in the attainment of salvation. And there's so many stories of people who take a monastic or a vow of celibacy and then end up crossing the line. Okay. So it's like over and over said, it's like they're very rare and unique people. And, actually that's something, mean, I'm not Greek Orthodox, but that whole side of my family is. And in the Greek Orthodox tradition, and also in the rabbinical tradition, you're allowed to have a spouse, you know? And, I was speaking with someone who was actually raised to become, a priest, and was very, very charismatic. And, talking to him, he was sharing how, he was raised at a young age. He was put into seminary school. Um, so it was like before he had the sexual urges. And then as the time came on, he took up with the woman who was cleaning the church and ended up having, children with this woman. And when he approached the patriarchs in the church, they said, don't worry, this happens all the time. We'll set her up with a house and it'll be fine. But this particular man really felt like a deep responsibility towards this, and he was really torn up. So they actually sent him to some kind of a psychological retreat, where his therapist was a very nice Jewish psychologist who said, what are you doing? And he ended up leaving the church and raising this family. And after having a doctorate in theology, he basically had no legs to stand on and had to cut himself off from his entire spiritual tradition. And I had this incredible meeting with him late night one night. And, we talked about this, and he was like really heartbroken because of the way that this spiritual doctrine was held. He was not able to enjoy life as a father and as a householder and still be a preacher of God's words. So we can see where there's like there can be real conflict in there. And Patanjali saying that you don't have to go one way or the other. In fact, if you will go against your deepest desire, it's not only dangerous for you, but it's dangerous for others. Okay. So finally, moksha, Kaivalya. And it said that we actually go through these phases, if we wanted to map them out, in 21-year cycles, which is like, wasn't it 25? Now it's 21. That in youth, it's about kama. It's about, learning through play, right? Hopefully we, if we're really lucky, we have educators who inspire us to get curious about things. And, in the old ways, through mentorship, you would learn a métier, or you would learn a trade. And in that trade, you learned all of the other aspects, right? You would learn, making things with your hand. You would learn alchemy. You would learn mathematics. You would learn communication, all of these different ways, right? So kama would be youth. In the middle years, the householder years, it would be kama and artha. So our need for intimacy and for joy and pleasure, as well as our means of offering into prosperity and having sufficient support for ourselves. And then as we go into the retirement years, Purushartha, Shunyanam, Gunanam, Kaivalyam, Dharma, and Moksha. So moksha, this represents, being able to leave this life without, the burden of unfinished business or debilitating regret. And it's where we realize that, we're going to return to our essence of spirit. Some believe that moksha is the most important Purushartha, and that the remaining three are only the means through which moksha is realized as an end in itself. This is where we are finally liberated from the need for worldly pleasures, and we are filled with honey in our own heart. the nectar of a good life. Okay. That state of beatitude where we're no longer in conflict with our environment, with our minds, with our body, with our emotions, or even ideas of success. And it was like that wonderful quote that Rita shared from the mediocre book she said she read, which was not one of the Russian authors, which is where, you know, somebody said somebody had died and they said, oh, he wasn't very successful in his life. And the person countered, but they lived a life of great beauty. Okay. So we look at the beauty that has been left in our wake. That ideas of power, of wealth, of knowledge and pleasure, they were all passing phases. So moksha signifies emancipation, freedom from samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. In other schools, it connotes freedom, self-knowledge, and self-realization that allows us to live life as liberated beings. Really, moksha is returning to our true nature, to who we really are, unapologetically, okay? And that's one of my favorite parts about being around elders in Kapuna. It's like, you know, eventually you don't pretend to care, you know? It's like you care, but you are who you are. So it's the realization of who you are and your peculiarities, and the removement of obstacles in which you were inhibited or you restricted yourself. It awakens through realizing our potential of creativity, compassion, and understanding. Kaivalya Pāda is another phase, which is when we realize we are the seer within and the seer without, and that all of our vehicles are expressions of our soul and our spirit. The vestments of the seer resolve back to their root, in which they are not a burden to be carried. The yogi feels held as kritartham, a fulfilled soul. All the evolutes come back to the seer, and we live in a state of benevolent freedom. Chitta Shakti, the seed of all seeing, of Paramatma, of the greater integrity, the universal spirit, the ego recalls its nature as coming from that. So where Patanjali began the Yoga Sutras with Atha, right here, right now, he closes the Kaivalya Pāda with iti. That's it. That is all. Fini.